As I've listened to the stories of thousands of women of all ages, in all kinds of stages, through the years, I've kept their stories locked in the vault of my heart. I feel as if they've been walking around with me all through these years. They've bothered me. They've prodded me. And sometimes kept me up at night. Ultimately, they've increased my passion to reframe and reimagine the powerful positions of mother and matriarch within the family system. I'm a problem solver, so I set out to find a way to perhaps change the trajectory of this silent and sad scenario about a dynamic yet untapped source of potential and purpose sitting in our homes and churches. It is time to come to the table, Heartlifters, and unleash the power of maternal presence into the world. Welcome to Mothering for the Ages, our 2025 theme here on today's Heartlift. I'm Janelle. I am your guide here on this heartlifting journey. I invite you to grab a pen, a journal, and a cup of something really delicious. May today's conversation give you clarity, courage, and a revived sense of camaraderie. You see, you're not on this journey alone. We are unified as Heartlifters and committed to bringing change into the world, one heart at a time. Hello, Heartlifter, and welcome to part 2 of my conversation with Dr. Sandra Glahn. She is a professor of media arts and worship at Dallas Theological Seminary, where her emphases are first-century backgrounds related to women, culture, gender, and the arts. She has authored or edited more than 20 books. Yes, she has. In our first conversation, well, actually, it wasn't a conversation, I shared from Sandra's introduction in her new book, Nobody's Mother, Artemis of the Ephesus in Antiquity and the New Testament. I am beyond honored to be having this conversation with Dr. Sandra and for her giving us her time and energy and particularly sharing her story in such vulnerability and authenticity, her struggles through infertility and how that led her on a journey to understand God's view of women and of mothering. She writes, "One must never think the U.S. women's movement single-handedly introduced the idea that women belonged in the public vocational ordained ministry of the church. To say such an impulse started in the United States or that it started with feminism misrepresents history. It was not the feminist teachings of the past few decades that first spurred Christians to argue for women in public ministry. In fact, the impulse began in the church on the day of Pentecost, when a sign of the Spirit, not a sign of male failure, was the public proclamation of men and women together proclaiming that God was doing a new thing. So, if women once held church office, what happened?" Wow. Her writing is so empowering. So, Heartlifter, we're going to just stop there. I know I want to keep digging, but I want to get into my conversation with Dr. Sandra. So let's welcome her to the show. Sandra, oh my goodness, this book, Nobody's Mother. Oh, what a great title. Artemis of the Ephesus in Antiquity and the New Testament. Well, the subtitle is overwhelming for all of us. Well, I can say I'm a wannabe academic. I have been told by a male pastor I am not a scholar.
Well,
that
all
I
the more
can't
reason to,
I can't teach on the book of Ezekiel. I remember being in the
Goodness.
church when he said that to me, and I would now know what I would say, but then I was not where I am today, and I just
Wow.
felt this small.
Oh,
Because when you're told these things enough, you start to believe them.
yeah.
And then, that I'm just a practical theologian. I'm not really a
Just,
scholar. Just,
just.
just. And
Jesus
I was
was
like,
just a parable teller.
I don't even know what that means, but I have
Oh,
since really denounced myself as an academic, but I'm not. I am not. I am an academic. We all are
oh.
wannabe academics. We all are very wise. And you are here to affirm that in us. Nobody's mother. Where did that come to you?
Where in the world did that come from?
Where?
So yeah. So why would I care who Artemis of the Ephesians
Why
is
would
and
you
that she's
care?
nobody's mother? So the first place where that comes from is correcting just the simply wrong idea that Artemis is a fertility goddess. And that
Uh-huh.
also, which is rooted in the idea that she's a nurturer, which if you read Homer, that's laughable. Like she's killing children and women,
Massacring.
yeah, massacring.
Wow.
Um, so yeah, she's not a friend to woman. She is. I mean, I love Wonder Woman, but for sure, Artemis,
It's
no,
not
because
that.
no, it's not that. She's not that. And but Wonder Woman is based on her. We borrow some things from her, like her cool bow and arrow and her
Oh.
short skirt, so she can run better, and her hunting and her
Oh.
commitment to not
Hunting.
marry. Yeah, hunting.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Because she was known as the goddess who worshipped in the ancient world, but the twin sister of Apollo, the goddess of hunting and wilderness, and the protector of unmarried girls. So you're coming to
Yeah,
denounce that and just say,
yeah,
we read about her, just so everybody
yeah.
knows, we do read about her in Acts 19.
We do, yeah. So
Okay.
what you're like, what does that have to do with the Bible? Well, it has a lot to do with the Bible, actually. So, and particularly to the question of what that pastor told you about Ezekiel and women
Mm,
teaching. It's actually so, well, you asked a question. Well,
did.
who's nobody's mother? Artemis is nobody's mother. She's not a fertility goddess. She's not a nurturer. Who is she at
Mm,
the time of the earliest Christians in Ephesus? Well, in the same way that there's a stereotypical Barbie and there's a weird Barbie, but they got the same backstory, Artemis generically is who you just described. But
uh-huh.
who is Artemis of the Ephesians? If we look at Acts 19 and the big brouhaha that happens in
Mhm.
Ephesus relating to her, they are not chanting for 2 hours, great as Artemis. They're chanting, great as Artemis of the
Of
Ephesians.
the Ephesians. And
So,
heartlifters, I'm just going to lean in here for a moment and say, stop listening and go read Acts 19 because I needed to. It's been a while. I know the name
yeah,
Artemis, but in preparing to talk with you, Sandra, I was like, okay, this is why I do this show, just for me, so I can become an
good for
intellectually
you. Yeah, yeah. Best reason to
profoundly
learn, right?
right. Like I love to learn. And so I think it would be wise to stop and read Acts 19. Okay. And then come back to us. All right.
Yeah. So if you open First Timothy, the first
Mm-hmm.
letter of Paul to Timothy,
Mm-hmm.
chapter 1, just verse 3,
Yep. Got it
Paul
right here.
says to his protege. Now, this is a personal letter. This is not a letter to the church, but he
Right.
says to Timothy, I left you in Ephesus to teach certain people, not to teach false doctrine. So then when you ask, well, what's going on in Ephesus? We don't have to start
Right.
with the inscriptions. We don't have to start with the temple of Artemis slash Diana, although those are helpful. We
Mm-hmm.
can go straight to Acts 19, and it gives us a whole lot of information
So
about the
good.
spiritual climate
Mm.
in Ephesus in the first century. And I think we have probably focused in evangelicalism at least too much on Rome in the first century, which Rome's an
Yes.
important city, but Paul is spending a couple of years in Ephesus, huge harbor city. It's like New York Harbor in that a lot of ships are coming in and out, and so it's the center of commerce, even if it's not the capital. It's the center
Yes.
of wealth, even if though it's not the capital. And
Mm-hmm.
so Paul sees that as completely strategic. He can grab a boat, he can walk, a whole lot.
Easy
There are good
access.
roads. He has
Mm-hmm.
great access. It's a
Mm-hmm.
crossroads. So he sets himself in
Hmm.
Ephesus, and we know from Acts 19 and of course from archaeology and inscriptions that the Temple of Artemis is one of is enormous and central to the city, in the
Hmm.
same way that Bethlehem is connected with the
Um,
birth event of Jesus.
yes.
Ephesus is
And you've been to
connected.
Ephesus.
I
You've been
have
there.
a number of
Yes.
times. Yeah.
Number of times.
The Ephesus is connected to the birth event of Artemis and Apollo, but actually you can't find Apollo anywhere because it's really her city. So
Wow.
let me put a
Wow.
pause on that and
Yeah.
let's get some backstory because that will be relevant. So
Yeah.
we read Homer because so Homer's a great guide on
Some
what all
do.
these one reads Homer to find
One
out
reads
what the
Homer.
gods and goddesses are up to. Yeah. So as the story goes, Artemis is the daughter of Zeus. So Zeus is married to Hera, but Zeus is a cheater slash rapist slash
Ugh.
womanizer. In fact, my editor said your next book should be Zeus, everybody's father, Zeus in Antiquity in the New
Oh my
Testament.
God, you
So,
should. Are you going
except
to?
that I don't want to spend a couple of years on Zeus.
That's true.
But anyway, go with me on this. So Zeus cheats on his wife, Hera, who's very powerful, by the way, with
Mm.
Leto. Leto conceives twins. And when she goes to give birth, nobody in the empire wants to give her shelter because nobody wants to hack off Hera. But
Right.
she finally finds a friendly place right outside of Ephesus.
Hmm.
And Artemis is born first. Gods and goddesses are like little bonsai people in that they have full use of their faculties. They're fully mature. They're just tiny. They're not
Mhm.
like cherubs or babies, right? So
Hmm.
she is born little and she accompanies her mother for 9 more days as mom writhes in pain giving birth to Apollo.
Wow.
So then we see her going to sit on Daddy Zeus's knee and stroking his beard, which is the equivalent to batting your eyes at your dad and getting your way. And he says, "What can I give you, dearest? I'll give you harbor cities. I'll give you 30 cities." In fact, she said, "You know what? I'm not really that interested in cities. Make me always a virgin, immune to Aphrodite's errors. I don't want to do love or sex." She doesn't hate men. She just really protects her virginity and
Wow.
has even been known to kill somebody who accidentally comes upon her bathing. All right. And
Wow.
so Artemis is born first. Her brother is born 9 days later. But Artemis in Ephesus is very connected to midwifery and the birth event.
Hmm.
In the same way that if you go to New York Harbor today and you see the Statue of Liberty, then you can go to Paris and you see the same statue, but only one of those cities has a connection with immigration. So in
Right.
one city, a god or goddess could take on a very local flavor. We see something similar with the Virgin of Guadalupe relating to Mary, the Virgin Mother. Same backstory, but a very different manifestation.
Oh, I think
So
that word's key. Manifestation.
Artemis, yes,
Yeah. Hmm.
manifestation. Yeah. So if you were to walk into the temple of Artemis in Ephesus, you
Ooh.
would see both statues of both. You would see the short skirt, flanked with deer or hounds. But then you would see this bizarre looking, I don't know, bee-like creature with mummy-looking legs, and she's got a crown on her head that is the city walls to show what she protects or is the savior of. She has bees on her legs, which the bee was this sort of image,
Mm-hmm.
mascot kind of
Yeah.
Ephesus. That it was certainly the visual image you had of the city. And so Artemis of the Ephesians is not just worshipped in Ephesus. She is worshipped all over the empire. I saw one of those bizarre bulbous appendage, manifestations of her in Jordan, in modern day
Wow.
Jordan. I mean, it was all over, and people would come from all over the empire to worship her, bring gifts to her, or if you were super rich, you would
Hmm.
bring your money to be guarded in her temple because there's no such thing as a central bank system,
Hmm.
and your money's at risk of being stolen. So the city's wealthy, her temple's amazing. When you're sailing into the city back in the time of Paul, you would have seen it from miles away glistening. Today,
Mm.
that water is all silted in, and you have to take a tour bus to
To
get
go to
into
see
the
it.
interior. But at the time, it would have just taken your breath away. It's like 4 times the size of the Acropolis, Parthenon in Athens. Like it was just
Wow.
enormous, enormous.
Wow.
So back to Acts 19. We know
Hmm.
two major influences there spiritually, but as it turns out, they morph. The first is the magicians in the city have a big hold on Ephesus, and because of Paul's gospel work, they have the first bonfire of the vanities, and they come and bring all their very expensive magic gear. And we're not talking
Uh-huh.
magician like magic tricks. We're talking the occult. We're talking
Yes.
potions.
Very
We're talking
serious.
curses. Yeah.
Yes.
And
Yes.
they become Christians and they trash it all and burn
Wow.
it.
When I
And then
reread
they,
that this morning, I was just
woo,
like, gosh, this makes,
like,
why have I never heard this? This
yeah,
is where I'm always hearing this, like, why? This is
why
why
it's
I
right
do
there.
this
Yeah.
podcast because it's like, why have I never heard this? I've been walking in my faith
Mm,
forever, and it just
mm,
adds such clarity and relevance even to today. Okay. So they're
totally.
burning, they're burning, they're coming, they're
That's
finding Jesus, they're
yes. And
burning
Jesus
from their
changes lives. I mean,
changes
fundamentally,
cultures, right?
radically. Yeah. So the other thing we see is this brouhaha over Artemis. So
Hmm.
basically, you have all these silver workers, and
Hmm.
it's a huge pilgrimage tourist business. But the gospel starts cutting into
Lots of
the
money.
financial trade.
Yeah.
And that really ticks off the silver workers.
Hmm.
And interestingly enough, when they all gather, they chant for 2 hours. Paul wants to run in there, and his friends are like, "No way! Don't even. They'll probably tear you to shreds." And so they keep him out. But the city clerk comes in, and he says, basically, "Look, these people have not blasphemed the goddess," which is very interesting because some have said to me, "How can you say?" that Artemis is the background of First Timothy if Paul doesn't ever say her name. Well,
Uh-huh.
Paul doesn't mention the names of gods and goddesses. He calls them
Yeah.
things made with hands.
Right. That's
As
right.
opposed to, Jesus
Yes.
who's manifest in the flesh. You do the math. He's casting shade on Artemis all the time.
Yeah. No,
But
I
he
know
doesn't,
that now. I know that
yeah, but
now.
he
Hmm.
doesn't get himself arrested or torn to shreds because of
That's
saying
wise and
her name.
shrewd to
It
me.
is incredibly.
So
Yes,
incredible.
exactly. But
Wow.
also, Paul is also probably his Judaism is coming out and just
Mm.
not uttering the name of another god.
Yeah.
Whereas Luke doesn't hesitate to say, "Hey, they thought I was Hermes, or
Yeah.
Paul was Hermes. Like they thought we were gods." And he'll name the gods, or he'll even name a ship that had two manifestations of gods on the front, and he'll name what gods they were. Castor, I think, was one of them. But Paul never, in any of his
That would
writings,
go
just
against
even
his innate, like, it's going to be
exactly, we
holding
just
the one true
don't
God in
even
vain.
correct. We
Hmm.
don't even say the name.
Yeah.
And when he's standing on Mars Hill, he's in
Mm.
Athens and he has the temple of Athena behind him. And again, and Zeus right below him. But he says, "I see that you're religious." You're like, no jive headline right there. But again, he doesn't mention their names, and he's very careful
Mm.
to not offend their religious sensibilities. Instead of saying, "Your God sucks," he
Yes.
presents Jesus is better. It's the God who's near. It's the God
Well,
who
he is proclaiming the truth and not
exactly.
giving
Bingo.
credence to the lie.
Bingo.
Is that fair?
Exactly. That's
Okay.
completely
Boy,
fair.
that is something
Yeah.
we can make very relevant today.
Yeah.
Heartlifters, lean into that. Listen with wisdom here. This is such wisdom. I'm learning so much. Okay.
So
So,
you have Jerome, a church father in the fourth century, who reads this removed from the events. He has seen the manifestation of the statue with bulbous appendages all over her chest, and he thinks they're breasts. They're in sort of the right place for breasts, although they are very low on, it's more like your stomach. But also, she has, if you look closely at the neckline on some of the statues, it's the same exact shaped form, it's just much tinier. And
okay.
so, more likely, maybe more like a breastplate. We
Mhm.
also see some statues where her face is ebony, her hands are ebony, her toes are ebony, but everything else is marble, which suggests it's something
Ooh,
she puts on rather
yeah.
than her
Yeah.
skin. So there are a couple, and it's also missing some, shall we say, essential detail for breasts. So for
Right.
all these reasons, it's very unlikely that these are breasts, but that's where the logic came from. If
Mm,
something has many breasts, and in the West today, we particularly associate breasts with mothering and nurturing.
for sure.
Therefore, she must be a fertility goddess. She must be a nurturing fertility goddess. When there's
Right.
absolutely no evidence in the backgrounds, in the inscriptions, in
Hmm.
really anything other than later commentary looking back that assigns
Mhm.
that to her. Now, jumping forward, our best guess today is that we know that there was a huge Hittite influence, and most Westerners are not that familiar with the Hittites and their
No.
culture, right? We're much more familiar with Roman culture. So
Yep.
that's what we assign to Artemis. It's in the Roman Empire. But this
Mhm.
is Anatolia. Much more likely there was a Hittite influence, and we think that those are probably magic sacks she is wearing on her chest
Uh-huh.
or
That
as vestments.
makes
And
sense.
then you start saying, oh, we thought the magic and the Artemis were disconnected, but they're in the
Right.
same chapter of Acts 19, and I found an
Mhm.
inscription that did link them. And
Okay.
so it's entirely possible it's all part of the same soup.
Mhm. Yep.
So, what does that have to do with that pastor who told you you couldn't teach Ezekiel? Well, if you read Paul's instruction to Timothy, where he says, I left you in
Yeah.
Ephesus to teach certain people not to teach false doctrine. First of all, a lot of translations have translated that to teach certain men, but it's the word for people. So
Oh,
then we've assumed that nobody who's teaching is a female to begin with, but
correct.
women just don't teach.
Mhm.
Um, he also refers elsewhere to those going house to house, and some translate it, spreading gossip and old wives' tale, which is kind of a misogynistic
Mhm.
translation, honestly.
Very
First
much
of
so.
all,
Mhm.
can you think of a time in the New Testament where people went house to house? Well, yeah, that's how the church met.
True. That's how they met.
So we
Mhm.
we tend to read these women are going house to house and think, patio to patio, back door to back door, but it's
Yeah.
very possible Paul is saying from house church to house church.
Yes, I think of
And the
Lydia.
word,
Mhm.
yeah, and the
Mhm.
word that is related to
Mhm.
teaching nonsense is the sort we call it a cognate. It's a form of the word for magic. So you have all these little hints that maybe Paul has something other than hierarchy as the solution in
Yes.
mind. And he talks about as a corrective, he says, for Adam was first. Well, in the Genesis creation story, the man is first, but
Mhm.
in the creation story in Ephesus, who's first? Artemis.
Mhm.
And Paul's next line is, and the woman was the one deceived. Well, we have tended to read that, well, therefore all women are,
Are deceived.
prone to
Right.
deception.
Prone.
But
Mhm.
Paul says to
Or
the,
to leading and
yeah,
guiding men to
exactly.
temptation. Right.
Yes, they're cunning and deception,
Well,
right?
you say
Never
it this
mind.
way. Hold on. I got to
Okay, yeah,
find,
quote me. I'll bet I
well,
agree with me.
it's actually in the book. Let me just, okay. I had come to believe, this is you writing, thanks to Aristotle by way of Aquinas, that a female is an undercooked male. An undercooked male. What do you mean by that?
Well, Aristotle taught that men were dry and women were moist. And if it's not that different from what you think of as a chocolate chip cookie. Now I like my cookies kind of moist, but a lot of people don't. And
Correct.
so Aristotle, too many A's.
Too many.
Aristotle is basically saying a woman is a not fully created man.
Mm,
And Aquinas picks up on that as, more given to deception.
yeah.
Now, some women in Aquinas's view can rise above their gender. And I'm putting this in our terminology. He would not have used the word
Correct.
gender, but we can rise above our gender. And then he would say they were like men. He wouldn't call them mature Christian women. Um,
Right.
so like you could by choosing celibacy by hence the early church has a whole lot of singles. And actually, I think that might be part of what's happening in chapter 5 of First Timothy. You have the combination
Hmm.
of Artemis, who is confirmed virgin, and a church that has a whole lot of without a man women.
Yes. Yeah.
And why does the church in Ephesus have so many single women? And why does
Hmm.
Paul instruct his protege in Ephesus, have younger women, I want them to marry and have kids. But over in Corinth, he said, I want you to think about staying single.
He does. Always
Paul is
tensions.
all these tensions. Well, why would he give contradictory advice? I don't think so. I think
No.
Paul is looking at two completely different cities with different spiritual forces and saying the gospel is countercultural How do we correct error? I
Mhm.
suspect, given what I have learned about Artemis, that it's not that there's an anti-male uh,
Mhm.
mentality.
Yeah.
There were lots of men who loved Artemis in the same way lots of men, are crazy about the Virgin Mary.
Mhm.
It was not an anti-man view, but it was definitely connected with the upper classes. If you
Mm.
have in your city the sort of the junior league,
Oh
the
yeah.
young girls that come
Mhm.
up as part of the wealthy, their names are on the inscriptions, and it's sort of, and their
Yeah.
mothers and their
They are
grandmothers, you
the
don't see their,
debutantes, right?
that's right, that's right. And
Mhm.
you don't see their dads mentioned anywhere, which is
No.
really unusual in the ancient
Mhm.
world. You
Mhm.
don't see their brothers or their uncles unless they're a senator or somebody, right, of enormous power. Then
Correct.
then they might show up in the inscriptions. But in
Yes.
general, this is the girls' club, the wealthy girls' club.
Yes.
And you just don't see the married as part of that cult.
Right. The married or the mothering, or
Yeah,
mothers. So,
yeah.
oh, you took a breath. You were going to
So I
say
did take a
something.
breath. Yeah, let me add, because I'm glad you mentioned mothers.
Yes.
It Artemis, so you're like, what would that then, why would that connect with midwifery? Well,
Hmm.
because of her history with her own mother. Artemis is in Ephesus is constantly referred to as a midwife or in connection with midwifery. Here's an example. Her first temple burned to the ground at approximately the same time that Alexander the Great was born. So by
Wow.
the time of the earliest Christians, the question of, well, why didn't she protect her temple? Is she powerless? The
Hmm.
answer to that was, oh, well, she can't be two places at once because their
Hmm.
gods weren't. And she had to be helping with the delivery of Alexander the Great. So this is how, like, she goes to the important births and makes sure they make it
Right.
okay. And there is a lot of evidence that her eras could be euthanizing.
Yeah.
So if you think about the number one cause of death for women at the time is
It's
childbirth.
childbirth.
So
Hmm.
they would go to her temple and they would pray, deliver me safely or kill me quickly and
Or,
painlessly, but
yeah.
don't let me die because I expired trying to push a baby out. It was
Yeah.
terrifying. It was terrifying. And so I
Hmm.
suspect that Paul, being a good pastor and shepherd, is concerned that the number one fear of a Gentile woman becoming a Christ follower is, are you kidding me?
Uh-huh.
Like, I'm putting my life on the line by hacking her off.
I
This
won't
better be
I won't be
true.
protected.
Yeah.
Right. I think what I'm really getting from only this intro that you are bringing to us, it's just hitting me really, really hard, is okay, you correct me if I'm wrong. How we maybe have been blind to, still are blind to, the power of these ingrained cultural narratives.
Yeah.
Okay, like
Oh, yeah.
gods and goddesses in early Ephesus, and
Oh, yeah.
we we either overemphasize the role of the occult, maybe like, okay, I'm just going to call it out because I was a charismatic for 25 years, so every other word out of
Mhm.
my mouth was Satan.
Yeah.
Or then when I become a Reformed Presbyterian, I hardly ever
Mhm.
talk about him.
Yeah, yeah.
This is my life experience, and I just think what I felt in reading this was, number one, I'm informing myself, I'm educating myself. You give us such an education on a theological background of the early days, the early church, and that is so relevant to me with what I feel like I'm living today. Is that safe to say?
That is completely safe thing to say. And
Okay.
and here's a misunderstanding. People hear me talk about these things and they
Hmm.
say, "Well, that means I can't understand the Bible unless I know all the backgrounds in Ephesus." No,
Hmm.
no, no.
Hmm.
You can get a lot about First Timothy by reading Acts 19.
Yes.
That's where I started. I
Right.
just wanted to know more about who she was, but you
Yeah.
can still get a sense of, hey, this is the false doctrine that has a
False
grip
doctrine.
on this
Yes.
city. Yeah,
Had a
that
grip on the city. I talked over
completely.
you. The false doctrine that had a grip on the city, on the culture, on the
Yeah,
minds, on the
yeah.
hearts. That's what I think's relevant.
And it's in and outside the church, right? It's not just that.
Yes.
It's
No,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah,
And
yeah.
Paul was in in and outside the church. I mean, that was the
Yes.
beauty
Yeah.
of the early church, right? They were in
Yes.
it, but not
Yes.
of it. They were
Correct.
infiltrated. They were out with the people. They weren't,
Yeah.
sequestered, but they
Right.
would come home at night and they would meet their group and they would build each other back up and then they
Yeah.
would go back out,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Yes. I mean,
It
he's a tent
wasn't,
maker. He's
yes.
interacting probably. I mean, he's probably an awning maker.
Hmm.
It's very possible that he is working with a lot of elite folks. They don't have
Yes.
air conditioning, but you want a nice, you know, fabric shade. Or
His fabric shade. I love it.
yeah, yeah.
Can I continue to read that little passage? Because I have it highlighted and underlined. This is right in the beginning of Nobody's Mother when you're sharing your own story, your own journey, uh, grappling, I'd say, wrestling with the ideology, is that the right word?
Yeah.
Of I get married, I become a wife, I become a mother, I'm a homemaker, like your mom said. I'm a homemaker. You tell your story, your journey. We're both about the same age, and so we were saying before we hit record, the influences that came upon us at that stage
Yeah.
of Christian culture, which is fascinating, womanhood, 1990, and then The
The
Total
total woman. Yeah.
Woman, 1975. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And it wasn't really until last year when I started digging into the subject of mothering myself that I realized how influential those two books had been. Total
Yeah.
Woman selling over 500,000 copies in 1975. So that's a huge amount of books. That's no internet, nothing.
Yeah.
1990, beginning a little bit of internet, a little bit of that, yeah. And that sold over 2 million copies. Fascinating womanhood. So your journey was, well, now what do I do with
Because I hit the brick wall of infertility.
you? Tell
And
us, please share.
so imagine this. I mean, I'm the fourth of five kids. My mom, if you've seen Sound of Music, like she's like Maria von Trapp. We are singing, we are picnicking, we are having a blast, we are making clothing out of curtains. Okay, maybe not that, but she made her own everything. She made my wedding dress. She designed and made my wedding dress. She was like the ultimate
Oh,
P31 woman, and she was fabulous. And I wanted to be just like her. And so
oh,
when my husband and I hit the brick wall of infertility, it was shocking
had to
because
be.
if anything, I'm the fourth, and people would say to me, they could prevent that. I wanted to say, well, I'm standing right here. Thanks a lot. But at the same time, you get this idea that it's easy to have kids. You're going to have more than you want, as opposed to ever
Well,
having it cross my mind that we
there's
could.
still a barren woman stigma. I mean, that would have been when
Yes,
you were trying to have children, would have
correct.
been what year? What years?
So starting 86-ish
Yeah.
to,
So I had my
yeah,
first at 86. So I
86 to
understand. I
96.
mean,
Yeah.
infertility wasn't, I live here in Norfolk, Virginia, where the Jones Institute is. So, I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
that's
That's the
where
first IVF baby. Yeah.
very first, and my
Yeah.
daughter roomed with one of the very first
Wow.
at her college. And so I think that
It was
it
not a
was
subject for polite
far
conversation.
more of a stigma
Yes, it
than it
really
is
was.
today. There were no blogs on it. There was no one talking
Yeah.
about it. I remember them telling me, oh, you're going to need to go on chlamydia or whatever that was. And, so I mean, there were no options. There weren't a lot of options.
No, we're not.
Okay.
And the shame that went with it,
Shame. That's
it
the
was
word.
assumed that it didn't really cross people's mind, maybe you're infertile. It was, oh, she is really into her career. And,
Hmm.
we know what God says about that.
Or
And,
you have sin. I was told that.
yeah, okay,
I'm
yeah,
so
or you have
sorry. I was
sin.
in that
Yeah,
circle.
yeah.
It's not
But,
funny. It's really
but
not because
it,
it was damaging as
it
heck.
was
But
very damaging.
yeah,
And not only that, I was being affirmed as having the gift of teaching. And
yeah,
I have grown up to be a teacher. I adore teaching. I love teaching.
yeah, I
And
can
so
tell.
I was taught that Paul taught that the only legit avenue
Hmm.
for that was in the nuclear family with
Yep.
my children at home. And so that sent me into a moral, ethical, spiritual, marital crisis, primarily a spiritual crisis of who is woman? What was she made for? And why in the world, if I want to
Yeah.
adhere to the will of God, would he slam the door? That just didn't make sense.
It's an identity crisis.
It was an identity crisis. It sure
It's
was. It was
not only
devastating.
shame and all of these other things, but you are, and I mean, you have to look back. I would only guess that's the wisdom of our age.
Yeah.
and go, well, I guess I had to live it.
Yeah.
I really had to live it. I don't think God's cruel. I'm not saying God
Right.
placed
Caused it
that
or yeah.
agony on you. No, I'm
Right.
not saying that at all,
Right.
please.
He certainly
But
redeemed it.
he redeemed it, and
Yeah.
it's now, it's not being lost. And yet your
Yeah.
husband at that time, and your mother too, but your husband and then this other beautiful woman, Elizabeth, in your life at that point, were all affirming and encouraging you. Your husband, I
Yeah.
love the story
Go
of
to
your
seminary.
husband.
Yeah.
Go to
Yeah.
seminary. I
Yeah.
love it. And you're like,
Yeah.
why?
He was the one who had much broader views about what a woman could do. And
Thank God.
thank God is right. But yeah,
Oh,
I didn't even, oh, I laugh. Now I teach at a seminary. I didn't even believe women should go to seminary and
not
let
at any
alone,
seminary either. You teach at
yeah.
Dallas
Oh
Theological.
my
Hello,
gosh.
that's
Yeah.
pretty profound. It's lovely. It's amazing.
So,
It's like
but
it's,
a pretty big character arc for me. But part of it was I honestly I don't care if I have to walk if God tells me you got to walk on crutches for the rest of your life, even if you're not injured. Okay, I'll obey as long as I'm clear. That's what He wants me to do. I just got to know who am I really supposed to be and what am I supposed to do
yes,
because this
please
isn't making
help
sense.
us, Sandra. That's the
So
question.
yeah,
What is God's view of woman?
yeah,
What is
yeah,
God's view of me? I'm 65 and I'm still
yeah.
there.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, first of all, a woman is not a half-baked cookie. She images God. Like,
Amen.
it's not that men image God more than women. We image God and women image God, and together there's a synergy in that imaging. So the first thing I am is an image bearer. The second thing
Yes.
is I was made to multiply. But if I look at the New Testament and even whispers in the Old Testament with the eunuchs in Isaiah
Mhm.
56, God is making beautiful promises to those who love and follow him, even if they don't reproduce.
Yeah.
And what's the goal of reproduction? Well, it looks like to fill the earth with worshipers, that the earth will be
Mhm.
filled with the glory of God.
Hmm.
And you see sort of a shift in emphasis, at least. Jesus, Paul, John the Baptist, none of them are married. And the command to be fruitful and multiply is not repeated anywhere in the New Testament. But what you are supposed to
Right.
multiply is Christ followers. We're supposed to make
Yes.
disciples. So we were made to multiply, but that doesn't mean that has to be birth. Certainly, that's a big part of it for a lot of people, but it's
Preach it.
not God's end all and be all for everyone. And
No.
that now makes sense why Paul would say some should stay single, which would not make sense if there's only one kind of reproduction that a woman is made for. We were made to multiply. We're made for more than
We
simply
were made
baby
to
making.
mother,
We
you
were
know.
made to mother.
We were made to
Yes.
mother. And you write
Yeah.
that one sentence, I didn't give birth.
Right.
You
I never
didn't,
gave birth. I never did. No.
but
But I
you
have
have a
children all
daughter.
over the world. I do have a daughter.
You have a daughter.
So our story was we had 3 years of no success,
Mm.
followed by 7 pregnancy losses, followed by 3 failed adoptions. Then we finally had the successful adoption of our daughter, and then I had an ectopic pregnancy. And so all of that literally spanned a decade to the week
Right.
of it all starting. And so, I mean, there are other things woman is made to rule. She isn't just made to multiply, right? It's
Yes.
be fruitful and multiply and rule. And we tend to say women are made to multiply, men are made to rule. No, 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 no. God gave both man and woman as partners those responsibilities. So that
Mandates.
means, yeah, the mandate.
Hmm.
And so it's not that men were made to lead and women are not made to lead.
Mm.
And then you fast forward into the kingdom
Oh,
and women are priests too. That's not just
I
for
know.
guys, right?
I know.
In fact, that's not even in just, in the future. We are priests now. We're all priests to our God.
It does
What
say
does a
that.
priest do? Well, a
Hmm.
priest leads others to God, leads
Hmm.
others in worship,
Teaches.
means that he teaches, yes, teaches the people. So all
I mean,
of
that's where
that was
Lydia is, in Acts 16 when we meet her. I mean, she's on the
correct.
riverside teaching women.
Correct.
That's what she's doing. And then Paul shows up, right, through
Yeah,
so many providential moves.
right.
And voila, the church at Philippi is born, and she is
Yeah.
leading a house church.
When he writes back to them, he talks
Yes.
about their partnership in the gospel from the first day until now. And you go, oh, who was there on the first day? The book of Acts tells us a lot of the backgrounds, a lot of these books. He's talking about Lydia and the
Yes.
gals,
And the
right? And
gals, the
yeah,
influencers, the real
yes.
influencers,
And
I
they
call them.
apparently have continued to support his gospel work, which kind of makes sense if, Lydia's a dealer in purple. If she has children, they're never mentioned. If
Never.
Aquila and Priscilla have
Priscilla.
children, they're never mentioned.
Mm-mm.
If Phoebe has children, they're never mentioned. So this was the
Deborah.
other thing.
I go
Yeah,
way
Deborah.
back to Deborah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Mother
Miriam.
to Israel, right? Mother.
That's
I
right.
arose. Deborah arose. Have a necklace
Yeah.
that says it because it's the premise of my whole studies on mothering. Am I going to arise? A
Woo.
mother to
Preach.
put my community in, right?
Yeah.
Am I, Janelle,
Amen.
going to arise, regardless of what is said to me, over me, through me, by male voices? And honestly, there were female voices,
It's
not just
guys,
that were just as hurtful and put me, stay in your place.
I was among them, sister. I repent. I'm sorry. Yeah.
That's so true.
Yeah.
The way that, yes,
Yeah.
I don't know. Yes. I definitely was always wrestling with it. When you feel that vocational calling inside, and you talk about that, teaching being the calling that it was, so I had this question, just to take an aside for a moment. Oh, Heartlifter, I hate to leave you hanging there. It's a cliffhanger today, but I'm saving part 3 for tomorrow. So much in part 2. So much. Want to really hone in on this thought. Dr. Sandra said, we were made to multiply. Never in the New Testament do we ever again hear the Genesis mandate of go forth and multiply, bring forth children and multiply. In the New Testament, we don't read that. But we are told to go ye, go forth, therefore, and make disciples. Teach, it says actually in the King James Version. And that word teach means to be a disciple, a learner, a student, a pupil. And the go ye means just keep moving forward. So when we read Matthew 28, it is informing us, it is the challenge to go forth, keep moving forward, and keep being a pupil, a learner, a disciple, and multiply. Make implies to keep increasing, to make many, 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 many. When you take that down into its transliterative state, it really just says to make many, 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 many. Well, I am challenged, deeply challenged today, after listening and being exhorted by Dr. Sandra and being a recipient of all the years of her struggle, her agony, and then her research and her study. I just feel so blessed today. This week of Mother's Day here in the States and in North America, to consider, how am I then? How was I made to be a multiplier? What does that look like in my life? What gifts and talents, right, have I been given? Have you been given? That maybe we are minimizing even. Maybe we are. I don't know. But I feel very compelled to ask this question. What am I being invited into after listening to this wise teacher that God has allowed us to be in company with, Dr. Sandra? What are we being invited to multiply, to make many, many, many of? How can I help advance the kingdom of God like Lydia did? How can I help make many, many more people see God, hear his teachings, sit with him? How can I do that? We were made to mother, made to rule, made to multiply. What a mandate and what a mission. So once again, thank you for being here. Thank you for coming to the table. And thank you for meeting me over in our community at Heartlift Central on Substack. and also on Instagram. These are our places where we can meet. We cannot meet by a river right now, although I'm looking for a place for us to gather. But we can meet in these places, and even on our Facebook group, Today's Heart Lift with Janelle. Okay. I feel like something's being birthed through this time with Dr. Sandra, and I just want to pray for us as we close. Father God, it is Mother's Day in North America, and I am praying, Lord God, that you will just make a spirit of rising happen. Like Deborah said, I arose a mother to Israel. Wherever you're sitting right now, Heart Lifter, open your hands, open your heart, your mind, your soul, your body, your being. And say, if you're ready, God, I arise a mother too. And you fill in the blank. Amen. Stay tuned for tomorrow, part 3. I will meet you there.